Welcome and thank you for joining FSEC this evening for our public informational meeting and land use consistency hearing for the proposed Cypress Creek Renewables projects, High Top Solar and Ostria Solar. The purpose of FSEC's meeting tonight is to share information about the project and FSEC's review process and to hear your public comment. FSEC statute RCW 80.40.090 requires FSEC to conduct a public informational meeting within 60 days of receipt of an application for site certification, abbreviated ASC. The applicant, Cypress Creek Renewables, submitted their application, or ASC, to FSEC on April 7th, 2022. During the first hour this evening, and it likely will take less time, 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock, we will have a presentation by the applicant about the proposed project, introduce the Council for the Environment, or CFE, and then have a presentation about FSEC's review process by FSEC staff. The presentations and information on how to submit written comments are on our website, www.efsec.wa.gov. Go to drop-down screen under Energy Facilities to the Cypress Creek Projects page. And following the presentations, we will begin oral public comment on the project. Speakers will be allowed 3 minutes each. Since we will develop our recommendation with information developed on our record, we very much want you to send us your comments directly, either speaking at this meeting or sending written comments to us through our comment website before midnight tonight at the link on the website, or at any time during the project by emailing directly to efsec@utc.wa.gov. Again, although this is a specific meeting asking for comment and a specific hearing on land use consistency, we do accept comments throughout the process. In the chat, you see the comment link. Following the informational meeting, we will convene, and I will say that we will complete the speakers that sign up and those that are present who would like to speak, and then have a 15-minute break. And we will then convene the land use consistency hearing as required by RCW 80.50.090 sub 2 and WAC, WAC, that's Washington Administrative Code 463-26-035. This land use consistency hearing may begin before 6:30 p.m. During this hearing, the public will be given an opportunity to provide testimony regarding the proposed project's consistency and compliance with land use plans and zoning ordinances. The land use consistency hearing will begin no later than 30 minutes after the conclusion of the informational public meeting. Again, I said I plan to do a 15-minute break between the two, which may end before 6:30 p.m. The Council is committed to providing a full, fair, and safe opportunity for all voices to be heard in a respectful atmosphere. To help us all have a productive and safe meeting, we ask that you honor the following ground rules. All speakers must be respectfully treated. No clapping, cheering, or jeering during the meeting. This includes speaking out of turn, loud talking, either in support or in opposition. Mute your microphone unless you're called on to speak. And if you don't have a mute button, again, try dialing *6 to unmute. Turn off your video cameras unless you're speaking, and that's mostly to make sure we have the bandwidth and nobody gets cut out. Please be respectful to all participants within the chat. I would like at this point to have our Ms. Owens call the roll for the Council.
Thank you, Chair Drew.
And if I may for a second.
Yes.
I would ask for council members to briefly turn on your video camera so that the people who are at this meeting can see you. Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Owens.
Department of Commerce.
Kate Kelly, present.
Department of Ecology.
Eli Levitt, present.
Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Michael Winston, present.
Department of Natural Resources.
Lenny Young, present.
Utilities and Transportation Commission.
Stacy Brewster, present.
Thank you. And you don't have to leave your cameras on. I just, I know there's different connectivity issues, so just wanted to make sure people could see that you are here with us this evening. Also, I would like to say that according to our FSEC statute, during the application process, we extend an invitation to the local government to supply us with an additional member during the application process, and that is Yakima County. We have sent letters to Yakima County, but have not yet received a member to participate during this process. So we look forward to having someone named by Yakima County. Moving on to the rest of the roll call, will you also, Ms. Owens, call the FSEC staff?
Yes. Sonia Bumpus.
Sonia Bumpus is present.
Amy Hofgemeyer.
Amy Hofgemeyer, present.
Amy Moon. Joe Wood. Patty Betts. Stu Henderson.
Stu Henderson here.
Andrea Grantham.
Andrea Grantham, present.
And Dave Walker. That's all the FSEC staff, Chair.
Thank you. At this point, since we will call the Council for the Environment for, let's introduce our FSEC Assistant Attorney General, John Thompson.
Yes, hi, this is John Thompson, present.
Thank you. And I will formally call this meeting to order with the roll call of the council members, as we have already begun. At this point, we will move to the introductions for the Cypress Creek Renewables representatives. If you would like to introduce your team, please.
Good evening, Chair Drew. This is Ty Wallace, Senior Director of Development for Cypress Creek Renewables. On our team today, we have Jess Mosley, developer. We have Julie Halpert, who's our environmental manager, senior environmental manager. And then we also have Aaron Berquist from our consultancy, TRC, who's supported us through the environmental process on these projects. Thank you.
Thank you. And according to our agenda, we now have the Council for the Environment introduction. If you could, Council Sherman, introduce yourself and your team and what role it is that you play during this process.
Hi, my name is Sarah Reineveld, and I am a Managing Assistant Attorney General with the Environmental Protection Division, and I am assigned as Counsel for the Environment on these projects. As the Counsel for the Environment, I represent the public and its interest in protecting the quality of the environment in accordance with RCW 8050-080. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on now to the presentation by the Cypress Creek. Oh. Before we begin, there is one very important person I have yet to introduce, and that's our administrative law judge, Laura Bradley.
Good afternoon, everyone. Laura Bradley. I'm the administrative law judge presiding over the proceedings this evening.
Yes, and after we finish our presentations and go to the public comment, Judge Bradley will be the presider, as well as during the land use consistency hearing. Thank you, Judge Bradley.
Thank you.
Okay. Presentation by the applicant.
Hello, thank you, Madam Chair Drew, EFSEC council members, and EFSEC staff and stakeholders. Thank you all for your time today. Next slide, please. My name is Jess Mosley, and I'm a Cypress Creek Renewables project developer. It's an honor to be here today representing Cypress in our EFSEC application for our Ostrea and Hightop projects. Next slide, please. Here's a quick overview of what we'll be presenting to you all today. The team will be walking you through our overall goal as a company, our West Transmission team, project status for both Ostrea and Hightop, and we'll open up the discussion for questions and comments at the end. Next slide, please. I'd like to start off by introducing our team. Ty Wallace is Senior Development Director for Transmission Scale Projects. As you know, I'm a project developer. Saya Stratton is our Environmental Director. Julie Alper is our Senior Environmental Manager. And last but definitely not least is our TRC Project Manager Consultant, Erin Berquist. Our statement as an organization, thank you. Our statement as an organization is powering a sustainable future, one project at a time. We have an incredible team at Cypress, and the company takes a lot of pride in the work we do in terms of management and development, as well as financing, operating, and owning utility scale projects. Over the last 7 years, Cypress Creek has developed over 8 gigawatts of solar, and we continue to increase our solar and storage pipeline today. I will now be handing the next few slides over to our Senior Director, Ty Wallace, and he will provide background on Cypress Creek and how we operate in our markets. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Jess. I apologize. I'm not able to turn my camera on. Otherwise, I would. But good evening, Madam Chair Drew, EFSEC council members, EFSEC staff, Yakima County, and interested parties. Thank you for this opportunity to present our Hightop and Ostrea projects to you this evening. So as I said, I'm the Senior Director of Development for Cypress Creek. I manage our Western transmission scale markets. So these are our large project, large interconnection, high voltage projects. I lead project and market development across the Western United States and oversee the team that's developing these 2 projects here today. Cypress is a mission-driven organization, as Jess indicated, and we support the transition to clean, affordable, renewable sources of energy. We've had a presence in the Pacific Northwest market since our founding and have been thoughtfully developing these projects that are before you today since early 2018. Cypress's mission is to power a sustainable future, one project at a time. Obviously, in this case, we're presenting 2 projects, but these projects have both been thoughtfully sited to minimize impacts to the environment and community, while, in our view, augmenting economic and workforce development in Yakima County. The projects are part of Cypress Creek's $500 million in planned capital investment in clean energy in the state of Washington through 2025. Cypress is committed to helping Washington and Washington-based organizations meet their decarbonization targets now and into the future. These targets and mandates are some of the most comprehensive in the nation and will require the build-out of solar and renewable resources to achieve them. Next slide, please. So as a values-oriented organization, I'm not going to dictate or read back what's on the slides here, but I will, however, summarize how we approach development with the intention of protecting the environment, creating opportunities for those in the communities where our projects are located, and supporting both local and state initiatives around sustainable development. In this presentation, we'll highlight our conviction in creating community benefit, demonstrated by a requirement of our general contractor to employ a community workforce agreement for the construction of the Ostrea project. This agreement will ensure that we have preferred access for local workforce, as well as targets for the hiring of women, persons of color, veterans, and other protected and disadvantaged groups. We'll be highlighting the fact that we have secured offtake for the energy and environmental attributes associated with the Ostrea project with a Washington-based corporation. So the collaborative effort with our partner that we will announce later this year, a little bit more of a formal fashion, but we look to ensure that Ostrea creates a net positive benefit to the environment, community, and the local economy. We're working to replicate this with Hightop in terms of offtake. with another set of partners so we can provide the same type of local community benefits. That's right. We employed our collective creativity, both with our project team, inclusive of our consultants, developers, engineers, and coordination and close consultation with a number of agencies and stakeholders, many of whom are here today in this hearing. We aim to site these projects in areas where they would mitigate conflict with local land use, conform with long-range land use planning, and avoid to the greatest extent possible any potential impacts or serious impacts to cultural resources, sensitive habitats, species of concern, and water resources. These are all benefits in addition to the expected $22 to $30 million in projected property tax revenue that we will generate for the County of Yakima and its residents over the life of these projects. Next slide, please. So I'm going to end my introduction and pass it back over to Jess with just a couple comments here on our core competencies as an organization. This is something that we feel stakeholders are always, interested in, what are our capabilities to manage and develop these projects? Cypress is not just a renewable energy developer. In the past 8 years, we have grown to become a differentiated, vertically integrated, independent power producer. We're a long-term asset manager and owner-operator of renewable projects across the country. We develop projects with the intent to retain those projects and be stakeholders in those projects from cradle to grave. Our development division has developed over 8 gigawatts of utility scale projects, and this is growing increasingly over time. We develop both on the transmission and distribution and community scale for utility scale projects across the country. We're an American-based company that has financed over $3 billion of solar projects through partnerships and relationships that we've developed over the last decade. We also perform asset management and operations and maintenance services for our own fleet of over 200 operating assets across the country, as well as for owners of hundreds of third-party operating projects across the nation. Finally, Cypress Creek is financially stable. We're backed by our investor owner, EQT Infrastructure, and a network of some of the biggest creditors and investors in the world. Next slide, please, and Jess, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ty. So this slide demonstrates visual representation of a few of our Cypress regional transmission scale projects. As Ty mentioned, we develop, permit, and operate projects of many different sizes across the country, but I'd like to emphasize that we have direct experience developing in the Western region. I also have personal experience developing the Texas market, and you can see one of our operating Texas assets on the bottom left corner. Next slide, please. Moving on to our Ostrea project status. Ostrea is an 80 megawatt project in Yakima County. We're currently en route to achieve our commercial operating date by the second quarter of 2024. Our Bonneville facility study is in process, and we're expecting our engineering and procurement agreement and interconnection agreement this year. We've received our PacifiCorp affected facility study, and we've also been granted long-term firm transmission service rights for the project. We have over 1,600 acres under site control for Ostrea, and I'd like to highlight that our development process is thoughtful, and from the very beginning, we focus on micrositing. We intentionally acquired over 1,600 acres with the intent to reduce the acreage and be mindful of land features surrounding the project area. For Ostrea, we avoided shrub steps, slopes, wetlands, floodplain, and other features in order to have as minimal of impact as possible on the land. The topographic and ALTA boundary surveys have been completed, as well as the geotechnical and hydrologic and hydraulic assessments. Additionally, the modules and equipment procured for the project are from North America. A very exciting update on Ostrea is that we recently secured offtake for the project. We successfully executed a purchase power agreement with an investment-grade rated commercial counterparty. 100% of the renewable energy credits and energy produced from Ostrea will be delivered to Washington customers, powering a Washington-based investment-grade customer's energy demand and helping that customer achieve its carbon mitigation targets. As we move forward with the project this year, we are on schedule to achieve financial notice to proceed by December 2022. Next slide, please. Moving on to the environmental studies completed for Ostrea. As you can see on the table on the left-hand side of the slide, we completed several reports from land use to rare plants, wildlife connectivity analysis, wetlands, glare, and many others. The primary goal of each environmental report was to gain a deep understanding of the land's sensitive areas in order to avoid and help mitigate any impacts the project may have on site. Fortunately, the study results were favorable and they indicated no major impact on the project location. Next slide, please. The consultation and outreach performed for Ostrea consisted of reaching out to several local, state, tribal, and federal agencies. Shown on the table on this slide, you can see we coordinated with 16 different agencies for guidance for zoning for the project layout. Next slide, please. Cypress Creek has a community workforce agreement in place for Ostrea that supports objectives in WACA Chapter 296-140 to promote and ensure access for women, persons of color, veterans, and other disadvantaged groups, as well as preferred access for local workers. Cypress will be providing jobs with full prevailing wage through this agreement. There is a demand and preference for workers that live in or near the project area. We'll be responsible for the outreach efforts to obtain bids from engineering and procurement contractors that meet this criteria. Not only are we implementing this standard for Ostrea, but providing jobs for local minorities in every project, excuse me, in every project area we develop in is a priority. Aside from targeting a local workforce, Cypress also sponsors several college programs across the markets we work in. In the state of Washington, we currently have a partnership with the Oregon Institute of Technology, where we sponsor a scholarship for students in the renewable energy space. We met with one of their representatives this past month and discussed paid internships for the students who work with Cypress during the summer break for those involved with the program and to get some hands-on experience in the solar industry. This also opens up many opportunities for these students who potentially work with Cypress after graduation. Next slide, please. On to our High Top project. I realize this may seem a bit duplicative from our Ostrea slide, but since both projects are under one application, we thought it was important to highlight the project status on a clear table for both. High Top is adjacent to Ostrea and both projects are under the same landowner. High Top is also an 80 megawatt project with a commercial operating date of late 2024. Similar to Ostrea, the topographic and alto boundary surveys for High Top are complete and the geotechnical and hydrologic and hydraulic assessments are also finalized. We do not currently have an off-taker for the project, but one of the main goals we're working through is to have an off-taker secured by the end of 2022. Like Ostrea, we secured over 1,500 acres with the intention to reduce the acreage on the project site to avoid any land features such as wetlands, floodplain, slopes, and shrub steppe. We are in the process of adding storage to the project, which will amplify energy security when needed. Next slide, please. We completed the same studies for High Top as we did for Ostrea, and the environmental studies confirmed no major impacts on this land. Working together side by side with our dedicated consultant TRC, we ensured the environmental reports captured every topic from land use to airspace. Next slide, please. The same local, state, tribal, and federal agencies were contacted for High Top, and on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see the zoning layout for the project. As shown on the site plan, one can see where the panels will be placed, which clearly demonstrates working around slopes and streams that were not suitable for the placement of the array area. Next slide, please. Thank you all very much for your time today. We will now be opening up this time for questions and comments.
Council members, do you have questions at this point?
Hi, this is Yakima County Commissioner Amanda McKinney. Is this at the correct time to make public comment on behalf of Yakima County?
We will be taking public comment after the presentations, both here and then we have an FSEC presentation on our process. Thank you. So we will call you after that. So for questions, you mentioned that you have similar processes in place for the two projects. Does that include the community project, workforce project agreement? Is that in place for both?
Madam Chair Drew, I'll take that question. That is not in place yet for High Top. That is something that is part of the conversation with our offtake partners. We always propose when we go out in the state of Washington that we do either a project labor agreement or community workforce agreement. But ultimately, we have to make sure that our off-taker is comfortable with the cost profile for those. But in general, that is our hope and intent is to follow the same path for Australia.
Okay, thank you. Another question I have is the area is known for the travel of wildlife from the reservation, no, the Yakima military property north of you, Department of Defense property north of you, to other areas south. How will your project impact that?
We are currently still, completing our wildlife connectivity analysis. I believe TRC, if they're on, could speak a little bit more to that where we're at in the process. But in general, we have attempted to site the Ostrea project to maintain a lot of that north to south connectivity between the two subarrays. The High Top site will also be split by the easement associated with the transmission lines, to allow for east to west connectivity, and that will also adhere to the Ostrea site as well. So in general, for the impacts of our project, we've tried to be very thoughtful, and leaving open those areas as well as any areas associated with delineated features or washes or associated high topographic feature areas. We have also stayed away from the northern boundaries, getting up close to the Yakima Training Center. So I don't believe that we actually abut any of those boundaries or fence lines associated with that training center, allowing for connectivity in those areas as well.
Thank you.
Erin Berquist from TRC, and I will follow up. We will have the wildlife connectivity analysis in shortly. It is based on the WDFW data showing where the least path cost analysis is for the wildlife moving through the site. And as Ty noted, the site has been designed to avoid the corridors and keep open those riparian areas for those really ephemeral streaming channels.
You mentioned there's one property owner and you didn't purchase the property, you are purchased a lease. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct.
So we currently have an option to lease, and we will exercise that option, upon approval, obviously.
Okay, and then in terms of the current use of the property, what is the current use?
The current use, I believe, is limited grazing and fallow land. I will have to double check and confirm that. And, I can reply back with our comments associated with them.
Okay. Council members, are there any additional questions? Oh, I have one more, sorry. Oh, I see someone here. Mr. Livingston, I'll let you go ahead and then I'll come back.
Thank you, Chair Drew. I'm just curious, is there any association with the Black Rock project that's just to the east that's been approved through Yakima County permitting recently?
There is not, Mr. Livingston. That is a project that is developed by another developer. I believe that is Baywa that has been announced publicly in the press.
And just a follow up, so I appreciate the consideration for connectivity for wildlife habitat. Is there, I'm trying to think of how the two projects, the two separate projects marry up to each other, or if they do, or if they're separate, and why you are doing two projects as opposed to just one.
I'm happy to answer both of those to the best of my ability, Mr. Livingston. So in terms of the abutment of the two projects, ours and the others, I honestly am not quite sure. We don't have their boundaries, and know exactly where their fence line is. That is something that, we'll likely work to confirm once we, have some time to investigate their presentation and approval. But the one thing that I would like to note is that in general, if you look at the appendix, I believe it is slide 21, our westernmost project, High Top, We are not going all the way over to the the westernmost property line. We're keeping a pretty wide corridor open there. And so that is property that is of this, area under site control, as we call it. But it is not within our proposed fence line area and project area after we've gone through that mitigation. So, at least from what we see today, we do believe that there will be north to south connectivity there, as well as the east-west connectivity through the transmission corridor.
I think Mr. Livingston was asking you why you split your application into two. Is that correct? Two projects.
I was asking both of those questions, so I appreciate the clarification.
Okay, good.
And to Mr. Livingston, to your second question, the reason there is due to our actual interconnection. So Ostria is interconnecting with Bonneville Power's transmission line. This is a 115 kilovolt transmission line that runs parallel for a short period of time to PacifiCorp's 230 kV transmission system, which is where the High Top project is interconnecting. From our view, when we were siting and conceptualizing these projects, we thought that it was best to try and find a location that was as rural and exurban as possible in the area of these transmission lines where they run alongside parallel in the same corridor, so as to maintain as much contiguity and consistency as possible, and to mitigate any potential issues with land use in more populated areas of the county.
So you mentioned that the I think it was Ostria then is going to be connected to BPA, but parallel to PacifiCorp, but you also mentioned that you do have an agreement with PacifiCorp for that Ostria. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, so PacifiCorp is an affected transmission system for our Ostria project. So we have our facilities study and our agreement is being tendered with PacifiCorp for Ostria for associated upgrades to their transmission lines. And then for the High Top project, we have a separate interconnection agreement already executed for that project with PacifiCorp. And then Ostria will eventually have an interconnection agreement with Bonneville Power.
Okay. Trying to keep the two straight, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Understood.
Are there other questions from council members? One more I had is you mentioned the Oregon Institute of Technology and how it serves Washington. Will it be Washington residents as well who can apply to that program?
So we currently have a standing scholarship that are open to residents or students from anywhere that are attending the university, the school. So they have 3 campuses, is my understanding, one in Seattle, one in Portland, and one in Klamath Falls. We've had that scholarship program running for 3 years, and it's a 4-year commitment. And we're working with them to extend and expand upon that commitment so that we can provide more opportunities. As we are an owner operator, and our intention is to hire in-market technicians and operations and maintenance folks, to support the operation of this project. And our preference is always to try and hire folks from the local community and provide well-paying jobs and benefits for residents of this community.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. At this point, I think we will move on to the presentation about the FSEC siting process.
Thank you kindly for the opportunity. Looking forward to the next presentation.
Thank you for your time.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for coming to participate this evening. My name is Amy Hofgemeyer, the Siting and Compliance Manager with the Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council. I have a short presentation to go over the FSEC process for those of you who are new to FSEC. A little bit of history of the agency. FSEC was created in 1970 for the siting of thermal power plants. The intent was to create a one-stop permitting agency for large energy facilities. FSEC is comprised of state and local government members who review each application before making a recommendation to the governor. This decision preempts other state or local governments. You can see here that FSEC is comprised of members from several different state-level agencies. The chairperson is appointed by the governor, and there are standing members from 5 other agencies appointed by those agencies to sit on the council. The current council is made up of Chairwoman Kathleen Drew, Eli Levitt from the Department of Ecology, Mike Livingston from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, Kate Kelly from the Department of Commerce, Lenny Young from the Department of Natural Resources, and Stacy Brewster from the Utilities and Transportation Commission. There are additional agencies that may elect to appoint a council member during the review of an application. These agencies are the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Health, and the Military Department. For the Horse Heaven project, the Department of Agriculture has appointed Derek Sandison. Apologies. Local governments must also appoint a council member for the review of a project in their area. For the Horse Heaven project, Ed Brost has been appointed. For the Badger Mountain project, Jordan Julio has been appointed. And as Chair Drew mentioned, a council member has not yet been appointed for the High Top and Ostria projects, though we look forward to that appointment. When a project is located at or near a port, the Port Authority may also appoint a member, though this position is a non-voting member. As I mentioned previously, FSEC was created to oversee the siting of thermal power plants. Facilities falling into FSEC's jurisdiction include any nuclear facility where the primary purpose is to produce and sell electricity. We also oversee non-hydro, non-nuclear thermal facilities with a capacity of 350 megawatts or greater. There's no threshold for alternative energy sources such as wind or solar, but they may choose to opt in, as well as transmission lines over 115 kilovolts. Thresholds for pipelines, refineries, and storage facilities that would fall under FSEC jurisdiction are found in the Revised Code of Washington, or RCW 80.50.060. Here's a map of the facilities under FSEC's jurisdiction. You can see marked in red, there are 5 operating facilities, including 2 natural gas facilities, 1 nuclear facility, and 2 wind facilities. The blue marks indicate the 4 additional facilities that are approved but are not yet operating. There are 2 wind facilities and 2 solar facilities. The clear circle is the facility currently under decommissioning, and FSEC is currently reviewing application for 3 projects marked in green, including the High Top and Ostria projects, which are what bring us here this evening. Here's a flow chart showing the general process an applicant may go through when they submit an application to FSEC. Oh, apologies. There are 3 concurrent processes. During an application review, the Land Use Consistency and Adjudicative Hearing process, the State Environmental Policy Act, or SEPA process, and the permitting process for applicable environmental permits. You can see that there are multiple processes that happen concurrently when FSEC is reviewing an application. One process is the land use hearing and adjudicative process. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to repeat myself. All of these processes ultimately feed into the council's recommendation made to the governor. Where an adjudication proceeding is required, a record is compiled and parties to the adjudication are identified. In the process of preparing for the adjudication, sometimes there are stipulations and settlements that come out between the parties. The council looks at all the information in the adjudication record and then deliberates. Finally, the council draws up their findings and conclusions from the information provided throughout these proceedings and incorporate those findings in their recommendation to the governor. With regards to the SEPA process, when an applicant requests expedited process, such as for this process, a review is done to establish whether or not the project meets the criteria of a determination of non-significance, a DNS, or a mitigated determination of non-significance, or MDNS. If the SEPA responsible official determines that a project meets the criteria of a DNS or MDNS, An environmental impact statement is not required. In this process, a determination is noticed to the public and there's a minimum 15-day public comment period on an MDNS. When a determination of significance and a decision to prepare an EIS is made, public comments are taken on the scope of the EIS. After public comment for scoping, the SEPA responsible official determines the scope of an EIS. A draft EIS is prepared and issued with a minimum 30-day public comment period, after which a final EIS is prepared and released. To be considered for expedited processing, an applicant must make the request in writing. The project must meet 2 criteria. First, it must be determined to be consistent with local land use policy. And second, the SEPA determination must be that of a DNS or MDNS, as I previously mentioned. In this process, no adjudication is required. The council prepares a recommendation to the governor in an expedited time frame under this process. FSEC is the issuing agency for any applicable environmental permits a facility may require, which may include water quality and air quality permits. These permits are identified in the final order with the council's recommendation to the governor. At the conclusion of the council's review of an application, a recommendation is made to the governor to either approve or reject the application. This initiates a 60-day window within which the governor will then approve the application, reject the application, or remand the application back to the council for reconsideration. Any application that is rejected by the governor is a final decision for that application. If an application is approved by the governor, FSEC then has oversight of the environmental compliance for the life of the facility. FSEC has standing contracts with applicable state agencies that assist in the monitoring and enforcement of conditions either in the site certification agreement, identified permits, or stipulations in the EIS or MDNS. FSEC's enforcement authority extends to the issuance of any penalties as they may apply. That wraps up my presentation for the evening. Before I end, I'd like to remind everybody how they may submit comments for this proposal. If you'd like to sign up to speak this evening, you may call the FSEC main line at 360-664-1345 or email comments to our main inbox at fsec@utc.wa.gov. You may also send in written comments by postal mail to our office at 621 Woodland Square Loop, P.O. Box 43172, Olympia, Washington 98504. Comments may also be submitted to our online comment database at https://comments.fsec.wa.gov. There are 2 databases available for the duration of the meeting until midnight. One for general comments and one for comments specific to land use. And again, those comment databases will be open until midnight.
Thank you, Ms. Hofgemeyer. At this point, I will ask Judge Bradley to preside over the public comment period.
Thank you, Chair Drew. As I understand it, 2 individuals notified us in advance of their desire to make comments. So we'll begin with them. And again, each speaking party will have 3 minutes to make their comments. And I will let folks know when the time has expired. So I'm first going to call on Commissioner Amanda McKinney.
Thank you, Councilman and women, for the opportunity to speak. Representing District 1 of Yakima County. We have seen in our county, obviously, a lot of people wanting to come for the sunshine, and now inclusive of people who want to create miles and miles of solar panels across our beautiful shrub steppe that is grazing land and provides a livelihood for a lot of folks. Our concern is not that we are wholly against solar power in Yakima County, but that there is a massive rush to use this particular process to bypass the local input that we believe our residents absolutely should be given the opportunity to provide. We want to make sure that local elected officials are able to be the voice to determine how much. And our concern is going through this process, we're creating a system that provides a unique and quick opportunity for folks, as indicated on this application, to go straight to your organization. And while we know that there are many members of your organization who give due consideration to the people and the impacts to our environment, with all due respect, we are the ones who live here. We are the ones who look out over those hills every day as we're driving our children to work, as we're going out to work in those fields, looking out over these hills. This will fundamentally change the way our community looks and feels. The hills are the fabric of our community, and we need to have the ability to say how fast and whether or not we go forward with turning the Eastern Washington corridor that we call home into a reflection of solar panels. So we would ask that ESSEC consider that we need to have input, and that our people are not resoundingly in support nor against. We just want to have a voice for consideration of whether or not we want to have this go forward, and how many of these solar farms do we really want to see blanketing our beautiful Yakima County. Thank you.
All right, thank you. The other individual who indicated the desire to present comments this evening is Stan Isley. Mr. Isley.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to learn more about the Cypress Creek Renewables projects and also to offer some comments. I am the conservation chair for the Yakima Valley Audubon Society chapter. So I'm offering these comments on behalf of YVAS. I had some questions. The project proponents seem to have answered them somewhat. The Ostria project at 1,686 acres and High Top at 1,564 acres. That's the total acreage, and I assume that is going to be refined down and will not be the actual acreage. There will be a lesser amount of acreage that will be actually affected by the solar panels. So we can confirm, or I can watch this process and confirm that later. Another question I have, though, also is about SEPA compliance, State Environmental Policy Act compliance. And I want to ensure, I want to recommend that these two projects, Ostria and High Top, are considered as one project under the State Environmental Policy Act. Certainly, it is not consistent with SEPA guidelines to piecemeal a project's environmental impacts, to do a piecemeal review, but rather to consider the environmental impacts of the total ultimate project. And I believe this represents one project. It brings up another point I'd like to make, and that is for consideration the Goose Prairie project east of these two projects we're looking at tonight, and the Black Rock project apparently in the very close vicinity of these two projects represent four projects, and there may be additional proposed solar generation projects in this Black Rock Valley, Moxie Valley area. So perhaps there needs to be some greater environmental impact consideration for the combined ultimate effects, environmental impacts to these, the development of these, one after another, the development of these projects in the Moxie Valley. That could mean possible environmental impact statement. It could mean a possible even state legislative action to perhaps set up a mitigation fund for mitigating for negative impacts, environmental impacts. This represents an opportunity for the project proponents. Environmentalists generally support. I support this transition to solar energy, renewable energy, and away from burning fossil fuels. So let's do this project right. We have to do these projects right and not make impacts. That means minimize any impact, avoid impacts where we can, and mitigate fully, even for acreage that is not currently existing shrub steppe lands. I guess my time's up. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The council will take your comments under consideration. I note that Michael Tobin has raised his hand, and also that an email was sent requesting time to speak. So Michael Tobin.
Thank you. I'm the district manager for the North Yakima Conservation District, and like the two speakers before, we are not for or against solar, but generally the siting is of grave concern to us. I will point out to the council that the pre-existing voluntary stewardship program, it is a program where the Washington State Growth Management Act requires counties to develop a managed population and development. Those plans under the growth management must identify critical areas, including those on agricultural lands. It's always been a tenuous situation having that requirement. The voluntary stewardship program was enacted in law in 2011, I believe, and it creates a process where a county authority is able to join and use a voluntary approach to address not only the impacts of critical areas on agricultural lands, but how to enhance those agricultural lands for agricultural viability. I will read the law. It is the intent of Chapter 300, Laws of 2011, to promote plans to protect and enhance critical areas within the area where agricultural activities are conducted while maintaining and improving the long-term viability of agriculture in the state of Washington and reduce the conversion of farmland to other uses. That is the law. Yakima County and the Board of County Commissioners resolved in 2011 as part of 27 counties in the state of Washington that include our neighbors to the east, Benton County. So what I'm talking about here, I'll just point out, it's nice to be involved in a public meeting for two, which are really being treated as one application. But when you step back and you look at the landscape from Goose Prairie to Black Rock to High Top to Ostra to the Watoma just in Benton County at the Silver Dollar Cafe to actions including the hop hills that are currently being discussed in Solway along the Benton County line, you will find a very effective habitat fence that excludes over 100,000 acres that is currently used by shrub steppe species that are dependent upon these huge, massive landscapes. The only reason these are being cited here is because by virtue of ill-sited BPA power lines generations ago. So again, the siting of this, I'll add a little number. If all of these came into play in Yakima County, it would constitute 8 miles of the open 12.5 miles along Highway 24 would be changed forever. This is a land conversion that would never go back. So I would strongly consider reciting these. I would hope that Department of Fish and Wildlife had a stronger voice on the council to do such. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tobin. I appreciate that. Ms. Opens, has anyone else called in or emailed to express interest to speak this evening?
That is all I have received at this point.
All right, so as a reminder, if you do want to speak during this proceeding, you can call 360-664-1345. Again, the comments for these projects will be open, the comment database from now until midnight. And again, those can be submitted at comments.fsec.wa.gov. And you can also submit your comments at any time to fsec@utc.wa.gov. Anyone else want to speak this evening?
I think we could, Judge Bradley, also take if anyone wants to raise their hands at this point, since we have time left, to let you know or indicate in the chat that they'd like to speak. I think we can do that at this point.
Wonderful, thank you. So if you do want to speak, please raise your hand or let us know through the chat function. Not seeing any hands or comments. We'll give folks another minute or so to let us know that they want to speak. I do see a hand raised. And Mr. Isley, just want to give other folks a chance. And then if the council has no objection, we'll let you speak again. Chair Drew, any objection to allowing Mr. Isley additional time?
If he has just a minute, otherwise he can provide additional comments in writing.
All right.
Thank you. I am feeling like I'm getting a second bite at the apple. Sorry. I didn't realize I was going to be limited to 3 minutes. I could have been a little quicker and a little more to the point. I want to also emphasize that it's important to maintain wildlife migration corridors. As some of the other speakers mentioned, this development in combination with other solar energy projects in the area will modify the landscape substantially. It is an important migration and movement corridor for wildlife. A sea of sagebrush steppe that used to exist 200 years ago throughout the entire Inner Basin West is now a kind of an endangered landscape, and so it's going away fast. I believe we should do our very best to find and protect and preserve sagebrush steppe where we can, and identify, create, preserve wildlife migration corridors. So please, I encourage the proponents to work carefully with WDFW, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife staff, and do their best to protect and preserve sagebrush steppe, but also to provide mitigation for all affected lands, perhaps on a one-to-one acreage basis. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so one last call here. Mr. Tobin, did you raise your hand again?
Yes, I did.
Okay, I believe we'll give you the same minute we gave Mr. Isley.
Thank you very much. Tim, I too wish I knew I was only going to be limited to 3 minutes. I want to go back and put emphasis on the voluntary stewardship program. It is a program designed to enhance habitat areas, and we are dealing with shrub steppe uniquely. I do know that Benton County through the VSP program is doing the same. We're dealing with species that not just only roam around like mule deer. We're dealing with sage grouse. We're dealing with the state of Washington having spent tens of millions of dollars on sage grouse planning with recovery efforts of any number of species. If you look at these things individually, yeah, I think you could discount. You could perhaps figure out mitigation, and you could say, yes, let's go ahead. But you need to, as a council, look at these as a whole. You need to look at the authorities of the council and knowing that pretty much when you get it, it's going to happen. That it is easy for a developer to bypass the local jurisdiction if they so choose, because they know it's easier. I'm just being honest. When you look at these things, you have a change in, I'm sorry,
Mr. Tobin. So we gave you a little extra time.
Okay.
Please go ahead and submit additional comments in writing through the
Thank you.
Through the email or the database. All right. Anyone else this evening? Ms. McKinney, again, 1 minute, please.
Thank you. I figured we might as well all go one more. I again want to place emphasis, and I really appreciate the two previous speakers. Again, this is about a big picture. We are looking at fundamentally changing what we see when we drive through, and as have been so eloquently stated, significant impacts to the natural environment. So I just want to emphasize the aspect of the people who live here. There are environmental concerns that we have, but the way of life and our being able to see continuity in our surroundings. Again, you hold that ability because we have been bypassed locally, to the previous speaker's point. That process allows for it. And as you can see, the numbers of these projects continue to increase, and it will only increase more. And where does it stop? I do think a novel idea is that are there places to put these where they aren't so readily and easily visible for the people who traverse these corridors? Again, where we take our kids to school, how we drive to work, they impact the way we feel about our community. We take pride in our natural environment. That's why we live here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney, Commissioner McKinney. All right, I'm going to hand it back to you, Chair Drew. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Bradley. This concludes our public informational meeting. It's 6:01, so we will adjourn for 15 minutes to give people a break, and then we will start our land use consistency hearing at 6:15. Thank you, and we will be back at 6:15. I'm calling to order the land use hearing for the Cypress Creek Renewable Projects as required by RCW 8050-090 and WAC, Washington Administrative Code 463-26-035. FSEC is beginning the land use hearing for the Cypress Creek Renewable Projects, High Top Solar and Ostria Solar. During this hearing, the public will be given an opportunity to provide testimony regarding the proposed project's consistency and compliance with land use plans and zoning ordinances. With me is Administrative Law Judge Laura Bradley, who will preside over this hearing. Ms. Owens, will you please call the roll for the council members?
Yes, thank you. Department of Commerce.
Kate Kelly, present.
Department of Ecology.
This is Eli Levitt, present.
Department of Fish and Wildlife. Department of Natural Resources.
Lenny Young, present.
Utilities and Transportation Commission.
Stacey Brewster, present.
Chair, would you like me to continue with the FSEC staff roll call? Oh, you're on mute.
I think we're fine with just the council members. We have a quorum.
Thank you.
Judge Bradley? Now you're on mute.
Now I'm on mute. Sorry about that. Thank you, Chair Drew. So I think at this point we'll proceed with the presentation from the applicant.
And this is Ty Wallace. I just wanted to introduce Susan Drummond from the Cypress Creek project team. She is our local counsel and will be presenting this presentation hearing on land use.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
I needed to unmute myself. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wallace, Judge Bradley. Good evening. I'm Susan Drummond. I represent the applicant Cypress Creek Renewables on the Ostria Solar and High Top Solar projects. I'm not able to unmute my video. If I'm able to do so, I'm happy to, but I'm not able to do so right now. If we can move on the PowerPoint to the agenda, thank you. I'll be fairly brief this evening, but what I wanted to do was to first provide some very brief context and then move to the Yakima County Land Use Code and Comprehensive Plan and address how they support the project. The county has determined there is land use consistency, and I'll briefly address that. And then I'll briefly turn to the county's conditional use permitting criteria and address some of the highlights of the project and how they're consistent with those criteria. We can move to the next slide. I guess the next will keep going. One more, the context. We can move one more page on the agenda. All right, yeah, thank you, perfect. So just some brief background on this. The council in 2017 determined that under its enabling legislation, it must ensure that certified projects are aligned with the objectives of reducing dependence on fossil fuels and transitioning to a clean energy project. That determination is, of course, consistent with other state statutes calling for carbon neutrality and carbon-free energy supplies, and is consistent with recent amendments to FSEC's enabling legislation, which further promote clean energy development. So with that context in mind, we turn to the next slide. The Yakima County Land Use Code and Comprehensive Plan are consistent with those objectives, and they support the project. The county code authorizes this project as a power generating facility that's an allowed type 3 conditional use within the agricultural zoning district. The applicant consulted with the county planning department before submitting this application and throughout its review process, and has documented consistency with the plan and code. And attached to attachment A of the application for site certification is the correspondence from the county documenting the consistency with the land use code. And of course, that's prima facie proof of consistency with the code. I refer the council to Council Order 879 on the Goose Prairie project. That was the order granting expedited processing with which documents that consistency. The applicant also prepared a very detailed land use review, which further documents consistency, and that is attachment A to the application for site certification. And that material goes through both the plan and code and the specific permitting criteria to document that consistency. So if we can move to the next slide. And the next slide shows the, yes, thank you, counties. I'm sorry?
This is Judge Bradley. So if you could please slow down a little bit. We do have a court reporter making a transcript of the hearing, and we want to make sure we get a clear record. So just give her a chance to keep up with you, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. I will do so. So these are the county's 9 criteria for granting conditional use permits, and we're not here tonight to evaluate these criteria, but I did want to point them out. And of course, the application, the first attachment to the application for site certification goes through these criteria. But in general, just to provide an overview of that, they provide for land use compatibility with surrounding uses. And that assessment kind of looks in at the project in relationship to surrounding uses. It looks at whether the project is supported with adequate infrastructure and whether local code requirements can be met. If we can move to the next slide. So briefly, some highlights on the criteria. First, I want to look at where the project is. It's on vacant, non-irrigated land. It will not adversely impact public infrastructure or environmental resources. It fully complies with the county's critical area ordinance. It also supports the rural economy through tax revenue and lease payments. So it provides an overall benefit to the community, and that was touched on in the earlier presentation. In terms of comprehensive plan consistency, the project is consistent with the county's objective of considering energy supply alternatives and also diversifying the regional agricultural economy. The county plan's rural and agricultural goals are also met. The project provides economic support to minimize land conversion risks. On the site itself, crop production has been non-existent for over 25 years, and the weedy species, which are dominant in the previously plowed areas, are not well suited for year-round livestock grazing. And then, of course, after its commercial life, the project would be decommissioned and removed. If we could move to the next slide. These are criteria 7B and 7G, which dive into consistency with neighboring uses. This is a very rural, remote area. As we heard earlier, the project is north of State Route 24. It's south of Yakima Training Center, and it's 20 to 22 miles east of Moxie. On the preliminary site plans, that solar panels and access roads will not be within 300 feet of the Yakima Training Center, and the applicant has consulted with the training center and completed a glare analysis, and no issues have arisen there. Also, there's grazing to the east and to the west. On the west, the nearest structure is 2.5 to 3.6 miles away. To the east, the nearest structure is 850 feet east from Austria's boundary and 3 miles from High Top's boundary. So there are few homes in the area. There are no schools in the vicinity. So this is an ideal location for this proposed use. With regard to transportation impacts, the State Route 24 approach onto the private access road will be improved for safety and access, and of course, county and WSDOT requirements will all be met. The Washington State Department of Transportation has provided conceptual approval of the access, and that's at attachment P to the application. With regard to regulatory compliance and the property size, we heard earlier about the size of the property that was outlined as under lease control is larger than what is actually needed. So this has been ideally sized for this particular use, and the county or the applicant will fully comply with all of the county's codes, and that includes building codes, fire codes, and any other county requirements. The county also, of course, if this were proceeding before the hearing examiner, would have authority to impose conditions on the project. On the application for site certification, identifies development standards and identifies mitigation to address material impacts, environmental or otherwise. At attachment O to the application, mitigation measures are outlined in the application. The applicant has documented that the project is consistent with the county code, and by consistency means that it can be permitted conditionally under that the zoning code, and is consistent with the plan. And the applicant asks that the council determine that the project is consistent with the county's code and plan. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'm happy to address those.
I'll start with Chair Drew. Did you have any questions for the applicant?
I do not. Thank you.
Do any of the council members have questions for the applicant?
This is Stacy Brewster. One quick question regarding the property size and its compliance. Is that the two projects together are within compliance, or are we considering these separately in regard with compliance?
I should have clarified at the outset. My comments addressed both projects. I know I may have referred to them in the singular, but they were both projects, and both projects have been cited so that they would fully comply with the code. And that there's plenty of room on those sites. So more is under, for both projects, more is under lease control than is needed for those projects. Also, I did want to emphasize, I mentioned earlier on the certificate of land use consistency. I believe I mentioned that is attached to the application for site certification. That's at the very end of attachment A. Those are the correspondence from the county documenting the project's consistency with the land use code. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any other council members with questions? Not hearing any. Ms. Owens, are you aware of any requests to comment at this proceeding that were submitted in advance?
I have not received any, no.
Thank you. Chair Drew, would the council like to entertain comments from others in attendance?
Yes, if they are on the land use consistency, we can see if anyone else wants to comment with the 3-minute limit, and let's just allow one time this time.
All right, thank you. So if you would like to comment, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat. All right, Mr. Tobin, and again, 3 minutes and no second bite, please.
Understood. Interesting review of that in question of the community needs. It's vacant land. I think it's clear that it is not vacant land. It is used as habitat. It is also used as forage. That is an agricultural input and a habitat input. So to say that it's vacant leads someone to believe that it's not there. Will not adversely impact the public infrastructure or environmental resources. Certainly, we've demonstrated earlier the environmental resources is a habitat that is dependent upon these large open spaces. These infrastructures individually and combined will impact that, whether it's sage grouse, which really hates this kind of stuff, won't even be in that region anymore. In terms of agriculture, rangeland grazing is not predicated on having animals there year round. I could speak all day to how rangeland agriculture, which leads to the 4th largest commodity in the state of Washington, livestock, uses these types of ranges early in the spring. They move to other ranges, and then in the winter they use supplemental feeding. It's part of a agricultural process that uses and has used these grounds forever, at least in terms of our existence here and I'm wondering, how does the conversion from rangeland agriculture, converting it to an industrial complex, actually enhance agriculture? That connection was not made, so I don't know how it meets the intent of the county's code. Also, how does that same conversion to an industrial complex diversify the regional agricultural commodity? You're producing electricity. That is not an agricultural product. So I believe those points are moot and misleading. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in attendance who would like to comment at this point? Give folks just another minute or so to indicate an interest in commenting. Chair Drew, I'm not seeing any other requests to comment, so I will turn it back to you.
Thank you. With no other comments, the land use hearing for the Cypress Creek Renewables Project is concluded and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for your participation tonight.